Hey everyone, and welcome back to our channel where we post daily videos on cutting edge technology. In this video, we are going to be creating a SteamLit application that will revolutionize the way you interact with your database. We are going to be creating an application using Google Palm that will allow you to interact with your MySQL database using natural language. Let's start the action. So the first thing that we need to do is to add the required libraries and packages into our project. So I've placed all the packages inside a new file called requirements.txt, and these are all the packages and the libraries that we'll be needing in this project. So now in order to install all of these at once, I'm going to open the new terminal, and inside the terminal, I'm going to run the command pip install -r requirements.txt. And once you do that, it will start downloading all the packages which are present inside this file. So once all the packages have been successfully downloaded, now we are going to head to our next step, which is to create the front end of our application. And the front end of the application will be created using the SteamLit. So I'm going to create a new file right here, and I'm going to call it main.py because it will contain all the code in order to run our file. So since we are using the SteamLit in order to create the front end, so I'm going to import the SteamLit as st. Then I'm going to start adding components inside my SteamLit app. So firstly, I'm using SteamLit.setPageConfig function to set the page title as the database QA app and the page icon to be a bookmark tabs. Then I'm using SteamLit image to add the logo of the company and SteamLit.title function to set the title of the page. And here I am using this markdown to change the color of this text, and there will be an open book icon along with it. Then after setting the page title and the page configurations, I am creating a new text input. The label beside the text input is gonna be question, and whatever value user will enter will be stored inside this variable question. So this text input is actually gonna take the prompt or the question for which the user wants to get answer from the database. Then I'm gonna create a button using the SteamLit.button function. The text from the button is gonna be submit, and its state will be stored inside a variable called submit. Then we are checking if the question is not empty and the submit button has been clicked. Then we are going to create SteamLit.header saying answer, and the response will be printed. Now let's quickly go ahead and open the terminal to run our app to see how it looks like. So once you run the command SteamLit run main.py, a new browser window will be opened and it will show you the front end of our application. So this is how our application looks like, and whatever question you will enter here and press the submit button, then your answer will be displayed right here. Alright. So our application front end is ready. Now we need to create the back end of our application. But before that, I'm going to show you the MySQL database with which we will be interacting with the Google Palm. So I'm going to head to my MySQL workbench. I have connected to my local MySQL server, and these are all the databases which are present. Out of these databases, for this project, I'm going to be using the pet data database. You can see that it has 4 tables: owners, pets, procedure details, and procedures history. And you can also expand it to view the columns present inside each table. So I'm going to use this MySQL database to interact with it using Google Palm through our application. Now in order to create the backend code for our application, I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to call it app.py. So inside this app.py file, firstly, we are going to add the required libraries from the packages that we have downloaded. So these are all the libraries that we'll be using. After that, I'm going to create a new function called getDBChain, inside which we are going to make the connection with our MySQL database along with the creation of the chain and connection of the database with our chain. So let's go ahead and do it. So firstly, we are going to create the connection with the DB, and for that, I am creating 4 variables. First is for the DB user, then we have the password, host, and the database name. So for my database, the DB username is the root, password is an empty string, and host is localhost because the MySQL server is running locally, and the database name is pet data. You have to assign these values to the variables according to your database. After that, I am using the SQL database from the LangChain utilities, and I am using its from URI method to create a connection with my database. And inside this from URI function, I am going to be using the PyMySQL, in which I am firstly going to pass the username, the password, and then I am going to pass the DB host and the database name along with sample rows in the table info in order to display the data. You can also skip this line, but I'm gonna show you what is the purpose of this line. So once you are done with it, now in order to test whether the connection has actually been established with the database or not, I'm gonna go ahead and run the command print db.table_info, and this line is going to display all the tables which are present inside this pet data database along with the first 3 rows of all the tables. So the sample rows in the table info equal to 3 is actually going to display 3 sample rows from each table present inside this database. Now in order to test it out, I'm going to open the terminal once again and run the file. But right now this function will not be triggered because we haven't called it yet. So I'm going to head to my main.py file and I'm going to call the function right here. So I'm going to say chain equals to get_db_chain, and since it is present inside a different file, so I'm gonna import that file as well. So I'm gonna say from app import star, right? So once the button is clicked, the getDBChain function will be triggered, and inside this function we are setting firstly the connection to our database and we are printing the db.table_info. Now let's go ahead and rerun it because we have changed the source code of our file, right? So in the question, I'm gonna pass anything. Simply click on the submit button. It will show you the response here, and if we head to the terminal in our VS Code, you will see that we have some data available. So firstly, it is showing us the tables, or in other words, the table schema for all the tables which are present inside the database. So firstly, it is showing us that we have the table called owners. These are all the fields inside the owners table along with their data types, and then it is showing the 3 rows from the owners table. After that, it is showing that there is a table called pets. These are all the fields along with their data types, and these are the first 3 rows of the pets table, and so on. So this table db.table_info function actually displays the schema of all the tables present inside the database along with 3 or as much sample rows as you have defined right here. So all of this data in our terminal shows that our application has been successfully connected to the database. Now we are all set to move ahead. Then we are gonna move ahead and initialize our model, which is the Google Palm. So I'm gonna create a new variable called LLM, and I'm gonna initialize the Google Palm object and assign its value to this LLM. So inside this Google Palm, you have to provide the Google API key, which I have set inside my .environment file. And you can set any value for the temperature, which is the uniqueness or the creativeness of the response. Once the model is initialized, now we are gonna move to initialize our embeddings. So I'm gonna create a new variable called embeddings, and inside it I'm gonna set the model name to be sentence transformer all mini LM L6 v2. Here you will see that I've created my embeddings instead of using the Hugging Face embeddings. This is because the Hugging Face embeddings call method returns values in a format which is not compatible with the vectors generated by the ChromaDB. So in order to make it compatible, I'm gonna create a new class right here. The name of the class is gonna be my embeddings, which will take the Hugging Face embeddings as a parameter. So now instead of creating Hugging Face embeddings and setting the model name as the sentence transformers, we are actually creating an object of my embeddings. So this my embeddings actually acts as a wrapper for our Hugging Face embeddings model. Once this is done, after that we are gonna head to vectorize the embeddings and convert them into the vector store. So in order to create the vector store, we are gonna be using the ChromaDB. So this line of code is actually vectorizing the examples in the example list by joining all the values for each example into a single string. And you must be thinking that what is the example list? So let's go ahead and quickly view it. So I've created a file called example.py. This file contains a list called example in which I have defined the basic format into which we want the response to be generated. So our response should consist of 4 parts. The first part is gonna be the query which the user will pass. The second part is gonna be the SQL query which the user will generate on the basis of the question which we have asked. Then the third part is gonna be the SQL result. which the Google Palm will generate by running this SQL query on our database, and the answer is gonna be the answer of the query which was run on the database. So here in the list I've provided two values for such format. In both of these formats we have defined the query which the user will ask in the natural language. Then the Google Palm will convert it into a SQL query, and then it will run the SQL query on the code and will generate the response for us. So in this line, we are actually passing this example list, which will be vectorized by joining all the values for each example present inside this list into a single string. So you can see that here we are using this join function along with a space. So this means that all the elements or all the strings which are present inside this example list will be concatenated and vectorized inside a single string. Then in the next line, we are creating a chroma vector store object from a list of text which is present inside this two vectorized variable. And this will be done using the model which is placed inside this embeddings variable, which is the sentence transformers present inside the Hugging Face. So as you already know that Chroma is a Python library for working with vector embeddings and semantic search. Vector store is the main object in the Chroma that holds the vectors and the metadata. The fromText method is a method of the Chroma that constructs a vector store from a collection of text. And this collection of text is actually present inside this variable called toVectorize, inside which we have placed all the strings present inside this example list by concatenating them into a single string. So in simple words, we can say that this line of code actually creates a Chroma vector store populated with the document vectors and metadata derived from the provided text and the embeddings. And then the resulting vector store can be used for semantic search, similarity lookups, etc. Then we need to have the example selector. And for that, we are going to use the semantic similarity example selector, inside which we are going to pass the vector store which we have just created, and we are setting the value of k to be 2. Now we are going to move towards the main part of our code, which is to define the prompt template which will be passed to the Google Palm in order to generate the response. So in order to create the prompt template, firstly I'm going to create a variable called MySQL prompt, in which I'm going to define it that you are a MySQL expert and how it should behave and how to generate the queries in order to get the response from the database. Here I am providing it different types of instructions, that which columns should be selected and how it should get the data and what to do if the query involves today. So here you can see that it says that pay attention to use the current date function to get the current date if the question involves today. Then I am providing it that use the following format, where the first part is the question, in which we are going to pass the question which user will enter from the user interface. Then we have the SQL query, which will be the query to be run on the database generated by the Google Palm. Then we have the SQL result, which is a result of the SQL query, and answer will contain the final answer which will be displayed to the user. Now, after defining the MySQL prompt, I'm going to go ahead and create the prompt template. So inside the prompt template, we have to pass a few things. First thing is going to be the example selector. The example selector actually looks for the example similar to this prompt or this format. So in the example selector, we have passed the semantic similarity example selector to search inside the vector store, and this vector store actually contains all the values which are present inside the example.py file, which contains the list of example prompts for the database. Then after the example selector, we are passing it the suffix, which is a predefined variable for the prompt suffix. Then you have to define the template for the prompts, and this is the template that we have just created, which is the MySQL prompt right here. And you can see that it takes only one variable as the input, which is the question. So after defining the template as the MySQL prompt, for the input variables, I am going to add a single variable called the question. And all of these things will be generated by Google Palm on its own. Now, the only thing that is left is to create the chain. So let's go ahead and do it. So I'm going to use the SQL database chain, which is present inside the LangChain experimental.sql package. And I'm going to use its from LLM function to get the chain. And inside this from LLM function, firstly, I'm going to pass the LLM, which contains the Google Palm for the DB. we have the connection to our MySQL database. Then we are setting the verbose to be true, and for the prompt, we are passing the prompt template that contains all of these informations. And then once the chain is created, we are simply gonna go ahead and return the chain. You must be thinking that why we are returning the chain. This is because I want to run the chain from the main.py file. So now our code for the backend of our application is completed. Now head back to our main.py file, and once this getDBChain function will be called, it will return the chain which will be stored inside this variable called chain. After that, we want to run the chain and the response will be stored inside the variable called response. So I'm going to use the chain.run function, inside which we are going to pass the question which the user has entered right here inside our text input. And that's all the code that we need in order to interact with our MySQL database using Google Palm. So now let's quickly open the terminal and run the command SteamLit run main.py in order to run our application and test it out. Okay, so here is the application. Let me go in the full screen mode. Yeah. And here is the text input in which you have to enter the question whose answer you want to get from your MySQL database. So firstly, I'm going to ask it the question that how many pets have the gender male. Now let's go ahead and click the submit button. And here it is showing us the response. Okay, this is because here instead of passing the actual variable response, I entered the string which was previously there. Okay, now let's go ahead and rerun it. I'm going to go with the same question, click on the submit button, and you will see that it has provided me the answer 59. Now in order to validate the authenticity of this answer, I'm going to head to my MySQL workbench. I'm going to create a new SQL tab, and here I'm going to run the command which corresponds to my question which I have entered. And so the SQL query is select count star from the pets where the gender is male. Let's run it, and you can see that it has provided me 59 here and 59 here, which means that this application has fetched the correct output from our database. And let me show you another interesting thing. Head back to your VS Code, and if you open the terminal, you will see that once the chain is started, firstly it provides us the question which we have asked. Then we said to provide us the SQL query which will be run on the database. So it has also provided us the SQL query that select count star from the pets where the gender is male. Then this is the result which was returned as a result of running this query on the database, and the final answer which is 59 has been returned to us. So this means that instead of simply providing the answer and letting us thinking whether the answer is correct or not, it is also providing us the SQL query as we have defined in our format. And you can always use this SQL query to run on the actual database in order to verify the answer. Now let's test the application with another example. So for this time, I'm going to ask it the question that find the number of pets owner in each city. Submit the question and wait for it to generate the response. Alright, so the response has been generated and it has provided us multiple cities along with the number of pet owners in each city. And if we head back to our VS Code, you will see that once again we'll have the query which we have passed, the SQL query which the Google Palm has done on the database along with the answer which it has returned. So you can always go ahead and run this query on the MySQL database in order to verify the output. Now let's test it again with a more difficult question. So this time I'm going to ask it to display the name of all those pets who have undergone orthopedic procedure type. Hit the submit button, and you can see that it has provided us a single pet name called Blackie which has undergone the orthopedic procedure type. Let's see the query. So here the query says select name from pets where the pet ID in, select pet ID from the procedures history where the procedure type is orthopedic. And the query seems fine. This means that the result is absolutely correct. Now I'm gonna ask it last question, which is the most difficult of them all because it involves multiple joins on the database. So the question will be display the records of all those pets who may or may not have undergone a procedure. Let's go ahead and hit the submit button. And here is the result of our question. These are the pet IDs of all the pets who may or may not have undergone a procedure. Let's head back to our VS Code and let's scroll a bit to view the query. Okay, so in the query, it is selecting all the pets because we have said who may or may not have undergone a procedure. So now I'm going to change the query to be display the records of all the pets who may not have undergone a procedure. So instead of saying who may or may not have undergone a procedure, I'm going to say display the records of all those pets who may not have undergone a procedure. So this should include all the pets whose information is not present inside the procedure history table. Let's hit the submit button once again, and it has provided only one pet whose name is Roomba. It is a cat, the gender is male, and the age is 9 years. Let's quickly go ahead and see the query which is generated by the Google Palm. So here is the query. It is selecting the pet ID, name, current gender, age, owner ID from the pets where the pet ID is not in the procedure history. And it has limited the number of records to be 5. The query is absolutely correct. But here in the SQL result, it is showing all the 5 records. But for the final answer, it is showing only one, which is the first record. But you can always go ahead and view this terminal in order to see the actual SQL result of the query. So in this way, you can connect your any MySQL database with this application and interact with it by asking it questions in the natural language, and it will generate the answers for you using Google Palm. So that's all for this video. I hope that you enjoyed this project as much as I did. Thanks for watching.